I guess that's 2-1. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call to order the Planning and Development Committee meeting for November 2nd, 2021. Okay, I got to click on got it or leave meeting. First item of business is attendance, and I believe everybody's here. So we won't go through asking if everybody's here one by one. Second order of business is approval of the agenda, and as far as I know, there was no addendum sent out this evening. So can I get a mover for that? Moved by Mayor Bailey, second by Councillor Coleman. Is there any additions or anybody have anything they want to add? If none, I will call the motion. All in favor of the agenda? Okay, that's approved. Thank you. If anybody has a declaration of peculiar interest, I'll ask that you do so at the appropriate time. Delegations, petitions, presentations, there are none. So this brings us up to item 5, adoption of minutes from the previous meeting. So can I get a mover for those, please? Moved by Councillor Ferrier, second by Councillor Pierce. Any corrections, omissions, comments, questions on those? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the motion. Call the question to receive. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? See none. Okay, thank you. Now, having said that, that'll bring us up to, well, I guess we did item 6, business arising from the minutes. Does anyone have any business? You see none, we'll go to item 7. And there's just one public hearing under the Planning Act this evening to receive information. So this is housekeeping number 7. At DA 27-21. So Brandon, I think you do have a presentation this evening. So whenever you're ready, go ahead and start sharing your screen. I'll let you know when I see it. You're muted, I believe, Brandon. Okay, I can see it, but I can't hear you yet. And I still can't hear you. I can see you. You're sharing your screen. Nope.
He was talking earlier.
I know we can talk.
We could hear him earlier.
Oh, I see it. Okay, Brandon, we'll give you a couple more minutes. If not, we will move on and we'll have to circle back with the committee's approval.
I'll move it to get it on the floor, seeking a seconder.
Well, hold on, John. Just wait a second. I want to, because I do want him to present first.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're still going to have to get it moved and seconded.
Well, okay. Okay. That is unfortunate because actually it was a good presentation. But we will come back to that. Okay, Brandon, we will not let that slide. So if it's okay with the committee, then I'd like to not hold us up this evening. And so we'll let Brandon work on that and we'll continue on to section 8. Now under section 8, there's 3 hearings this evening under the Planning Act to consider staff recommendations. And just so you know, every meeting I do say that, and you'd be surprised. It's confusing. It is confusing to the public. So, because I've had people call me afterwards after we've discussed something to receive information, and they said, "Oh, you just approved it with no discussion." And I said, "No, we didn't approve it. That was just for information." So, even though I say it every meeting, it's still confusing people. Oh, Brandon, are you on?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, okay. Go. Okay, we'll go back to you. Okay, Brandon, you start with your presentation.
Oh, sorry, folks. All right, let me just share my screen here.
You're lucky I'm long-winded.
All righty. Can you see the presentation?
Yeah, go ahead, Brandon. What we'll do, we'll let you go through the presentation. If anybody has questions, we'll certainly take them at the end, okay?
Perfect, that's great. All right, good evening, everyone. Sorry about that technical difficulty there. But this presentation is going to speak to the forthcoming technical and housekeeping amendments to our comprehensive zoning bylaw as we first introduced them to the committee in July of this year. So it's important to note, as we've kind of heard, that tonight's presentation is for information purposes only. We're seeking further feedback from yourselves as the committee, from the public, and from interested stakeholders after having prepared the possible changes the comprehensive zoning bylaw. And a recommendation to the committee will incorporate all this feedback. It's expected that will come back to the committee for a decision early in 2022. So this is the 7th housekeeping amendment file that we've initiated for our current comprehensive zoning bylaw. And as we know, it's a living implementation tool that we update on a regular basis. And that's based on conformity requirements with the provincial policies, with our official plan, as well as feedback from the public and stakeholders when we would like to address implementation barriers. And this housekeeping file is likely going to be the last one proposed to this comprehensive zoning bylaw before we begin the full comprehensive update next year. And that update is required after the approval of the new official plan. But we've kind of been using this housekeeping as well as an opportunity to collect preliminary information for that project in tandem with the new OP project. And that'll just make sure that things are best coordinated when the time comes to make the updates. So a number of housekeeping items are being proposed with this project, including the typical ones like the removal of an expired zoning, the temporary zonings, addressing mapping errors. Where those occur, we're continuing to work directly with the property owners that are affected, just to make sure that they're aware of any changes or impacts. And if it is the removal, for example, of a temporary zoning, they'd be given the opportunity to either renew their zoning or apply for a permanent change. But we are having those conversations directly with the property owners. So in addition to those types of changes, we propose several technical amendments, as you can see here. And those are done to address the implementation barriers as noted on the slide and as in the report and its attachments. So many of the updates are a result of our ongoing conversations with the county, with staff, with issues that arrive, for example, during building permit or development planning or bylaw enforcement processes. And other updates are proposed for better conformity with our provincial policies, for example. And we recognize two kind of specific topics that have a lot of public and stakeholder interest. We've outlined those in the report as well. And I'm going to highlight a few points about them this evening for the benefit of yourself and the public. And those would be item 2.15, so that was just shipping containers. Our additional residential unit updates were made originally and approved by Council in October of 2020. We're having some good success with that project and those new policies. And we've noted some kind of ongoing monitoring that there may be a few changes that would help us better align the zoning requirements with our policies, as well as some updates to offer some more flexibility to residents who are interested in those projects. So what is this technical amendment that we're proposing at this time? So one of the items that we're proposing to look at is the 40-meter maximum separation requirement that's applicable to all properties on private well. And so that limits the ARU construction to somewhere within the 40-meter radius of the principal dwelling. So we're looking at a few changes to that. So removing that requirement from properties within settlement areas, noting that they would qualify for severances and other types of development. So it's a bit of a redundancy there. So we would be removing that. And then the requirement would remain for properties outside of the settlement area boundaries. And that would be done to maintain kind of clusters of residential units that protects kind of farming operations. But we are proposing some flexibility for those properties, noting that there might be clusters of existing buildings. And we want to give the opportunity to those types of properties to locate the ARU within that cluster somewhere, knowing that the land has probably already been developed to a degree, and that it doesn't really extend or fragment the residential uses. But as you can see on this slide, there's a kind of an example of an actual property in the county, and it shows where that principal dwelling is located and how that cluster, that new cluster requirement would, or permission would allow some more flexibility. So a few other proposed changes as well. It includes a requirement to use the same driveway entrance as the existing house. And that's being done to, again, maintain the residential uses in one area. as well as limiting the development area footprint of the ARUs to a reasonable size. And like we say, that's being done to protect the farming, but it also maintains the intent of the ARU policies for that new house really to be accessory to the existing residential uses. And we're also proposing just a few changes for protective measures for the natural heritage features on properties. And that's just to clarify requirements that might be specific to ARU projects. So additionally, we have some interest in shipping containers. So they've been a topic of interest for more and more residents and business owners of the last couple of years in the county of Brant and beyond. So as part of this housekeeping, we're looking at the opportunity to update our regulatory framework for these structures to better address kind of the desires of county residents and business owners and make sure that there's a balanced approach. So as part of this housekeeping exercise, we've laid out the history of regulating shipping containers in the county, as well as some information about how they're regulated in other municipalities. And that's been included as an attachment to the report. So just as a brief history, shipping containers were first introduced specifically into the zoning bylaw for both temporary and permanent permissions. And that was done in 2014. So when our current comprehensive zoning bylaw was adopted in 2016, permanent permissions were carried over, but the temporary permissions were omitted at that time. So those omissions and the rising popularity of shipping containers has led to an increase in complaints and to inquiries about them. So a housekeeping amendment was brought forth in 2020. It was adopted to reinstitute the temporary permissions. So we limit the permissions to 4 months of the year, and it has to be used specific to construction and moving projects. And that would permit the structure to be located on residential properties or any of the other properties that it wouldn't otherwise be permitted permanently. Definition of shipping containers was also generalized during that housekeeping, and that was done to encompass similar standardized structures and to regulate them in the same manner. Shipping containers are considered a structure under the building code. That's important to note. And they do require a building permit when they're over 10 meters squared or 108 square feet, just like any other structure would. After the most recent housekeeping, staff have continued to see a number of inquiries and complaints related to shipping containers, including the desire to modify the containers for personal uses, as well as opportunities for businesses to use them for their expansions. And we've seen some applications for that where they've had to come in for a site-specific zoning bylaw amendment for a business wishing to use a shipping container on their property. We've recognized that there is some confusion about building permit requirements as well for the structures. And with that, all that in mind, we're looking at some improvement to the current requirements. And we've prepared several options here that staff are exploring to best approach regulatory or regulating shipping containers in general. So as you note in the report, we've outlined 4 specific options that we're exploring at this time. And based on discussions and feedback, there may be other options that we wish to explore in the future, but we'll definitely keep you apprised of that as well. So first and foremost, what we're proposing through the housekeeping is some good public education on containers. Regardless of what happens with the decision in the future, the current requirements for building permits and the containers, we would allow those to be pressed a bit better, to focus on public education for folks. They will continue to be maintained or should continue to be addressed on a complaint basis as they are now.
Point of order. Is it just me or is Brandon starting to mute?
Yeah, Brandon, is there any way you can make yourself clearer?
Did you put something over the microphone possibly?
No, that makes it worse. Hey, Brandon, you went totally mute on us at that
It was
point.
really good until then.
Yeah, it just gradually went down.
Nope. I mean, we can kind of hear you, but it's really low.
No.
I hear somebody that's
Like
not
your
muted.
it's like your microphone started dying as you were chatting. I
And
know it's not possible, but
when Brandon moved the microphone, his earbuds microphone closer to his mouth, it actually got worse and we couldn't hear him at all. I'm just wondering if that's not working.
What Halloween curse did Brandon receive this Halloween?
Hi, folks. Brandon's just working on fixing the issue. It seems like the issue is with his computer. I can take over here until Brandon's got this resolved. So the four options right now, I'm happy to start back at the beginning of the four options if that would help. So the four options here, option one is to amend the definition of a shipping container to differentiate between a regular and modified container. That change would provide the owners who have non-conforming structures an option to bring a shipping container into compliance with our zoning bylaw. And this would only then require a building permit application as opposed to a zoning bylaw amendment. Option two is to remove all references and requirements specific to shipping containers. So that would sort of be your overall deregulation of shipping containers. The idea there is existing non-conforming structures would come into conformity by obtaining a building permit. Such a structure would be treated as any building or structure, and zoning would be applied based on its proposed use. So shipping container would just become any just a regular structure. They would need to get a building permit, but for the most part, most shipping containers still need like an engineering drawing as part of that building permit application. The third option here would be reference shipping container structures would be maintained, but specific requirements would be removed. So we would still have that definition in there. So similar to option two, the zoning would be applied as it would still become a building or structure, and that would be based on its proposed use. But maintaining reference in the document would still provide some clarity as a transition tool to the new regulatory approach. And then the last option here would be really no changes. Keep things as is. Existing non-conforming structures would continue to be addressed on a compliant basis. And then we would undertake public education and focus on the safety, permissions, and requirements for the placement of a shipping container on properties within the county. Brandon, I don't know if you've if you're able to chime in there at this point.
I'm trying on my cell phone. Can you folks hear me? Okay. See,
Clear as day, Brandon. You sound great.
there we go. Figured it out. Sorry, folks. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. So Matt has explained those quite well. Thank you for that. I'll just note maybe one thing about legal nonconformity. We know there are quite a few probably non-conforming structures around the county with respects to shipping containers. And we just want to note that they wouldn't qualify for legal non-conforming status if the container wasn't lawfully placed on the property. So just keep that in mind with the kind of regulatory history that we've had. And if any changes are decided to be made to the zoning requirements for the containers, they would have to come into compliance through seeking an approval of some sort. And that's all kind of an example of information we would express to the public through public education. So just to close off, the formal circulation of the project has begun, and we will continue it over the next couple months with public and stakeholder engagement and education. And we'll be giving folks some time to comment, obviously, on the proposed changes, to make suggestions. And another public meeting will be held with the recommendation report early in 2022. So that's a brief summary of the report. Sorry again for the technical difficulties, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you folks might have, and hopefully you can hear me a little better now.
Okay, thank you, Brandon. And I'll get you to stop sharing so I can see the committee members. Okay, appreciate it. So we'll start with Councillor House, and then we'll go to Councillor Pierce, and then Councillor Goward. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Brandon. Thanks for the presentation. Very interesting. As we embark on the balanced approach to shipping containers, as you put it, and which obviously a complex subject, and we look forward to seeing the journey of that. I'm wondering, would there be a benefit to stipulating that this is shipping containers for storage purposes, or or shipping containers for non-dwelling purposes. Some kind of front end definition, because more and more people are becoming aware of and interested in the possible use of shipping containers as tiny homes. We've had some inquiries about that, and a little bit of rumors about that. And it would seem to me that any residential use of a shipping container would default to the additional residential or the alternative residential units, the ARUs, and fall under that. So by default, everything that you're talking about regarding shipping containers is when they are used for storage, I think. And so I'm just wondering if some definition needs to be created for that. And I'm also, I don't know if somebody puts a shipping container in their backyard and turns it into a man cave or a yoga hideaway or some, is it then residential, or is it still there's some gray areas there, and I'm just wondering if as we embark on digging into this, if that's something that we can try to nail down to.
Yeah, that's a great point, Councillor House. So part of the reason we are looking to address shipping containers is exactly that. The current implementation of them, there is a bit of a gray space with that. But the interpretation of the zoning bylaw is that regardless of its use, a shipping container is a shipping container and therefore would not be permitted by the zoning if it's not a permitted use on the property. So even if it is a residential property and they want to use it as a house, because the zoning bylaw regulates it specifically as a structure type, it would not be permitted. And we've noticed kind of that gap in implementation. So that's definitely something we're looking at. And part of what the first option kind of looks to address is that if there are some modifications that have been made to the shipping containers, there's ways to kind of grab it into a different terminology or different definition under the zoning bylaw, where the regulations would be a bit different. But the way it stands right now is a shipping container is a shipping container, and the regulations or the requirements are applied as such.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Councillor Pierce next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Brandon. So yeah, there's a lot of interest in these containers of late. My question is, so any containers that are out there at this point in time, are they just going to be, I'll say, left alone until we finish the public input, until I think you said early 2022 is when we're hoping to have a decision back. How does it go between now and that point in time?
So that's a great question. I would actually maybe defer that more to our bylaw enforcement folks, or if Matt has something to say. But for the time being, I know that enforcement is done generally on a complaint basis, and that's just kind of been the standard moving forward. So if complaints are received, we would approach it under the current requirements. But I'm sure if our bylaw enforcement folks are on the line, they may have some additional requirements. Otherwise, we can definitely include that in our public education to let people know.
Matt, did you want to share anything on that?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, Brandon's right, to Councillor Pierce, through the chair. This actually has come up on a number of occasions. The way we are addressing it right now, they have to meet our current bylaw unless they have submitted their own planning application. And there is some history where if they have an active application in of their own, and they are showing that they're working towards alleviating the issue with the zoning bylaw, if it's their own application, we would grant them some lead time. But in reference to this being a county-led process, they would have to adhere to the zoning bylaw as it stands today. So as we move through this process, depending on what council decides with shipping containers, then we may or may not have to take a different approach with those existing containers that are out there.
Okay, if I could follow up, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because the reason I'm asking is the fact that, I think we all know there's a few containers out there that we can see. Some of them you can barely see unless you're looking for them. But what I'm looking at here is, so let's just say that somebody has a complaint against them, so bylaw gets involved, and they're made, let's say, to remove the container, only to find out 2 months down the road they can put the container back. I'm just not sure if the thought has come up or the discussion has come up to grant leeway until this is concluded, or is it going to be, like you stated, we're going with what we have now, so if in fact there was, they would have to remove it and then potentially put it back at a later date.
Through the chair to Councillor Pierce, in terms of the county's sort of legal standing with this, I would refer that question to Jody.
Jody, is there anything you can share? Or would we just look at it on a case-by-case basis, or what?
Good evening. So I obviously, since you're in public session through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Pierce, I don't want to provide legal advice in that public session, but I can indicate to you that it is important for the county to take a consistent stance as it relates to its bylaws. So, for example, if the county decides to waive a provision with respect to a bylaw for its bylaw on this particular issue, that position could be taken with respect to some other bylaw that the county may not want to waive any kind of provision. So that's the only thing I would just alert you to at this point, but this is certainly something that I could discuss with you further as in an in-camera session. I don't know if that helps for the time being.
I think it does, but Councillor Pierce, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess I'll just leave it at that for now and maybe have a further discussion afterwards. That's all.
Okay. I mean, it's a good question for sure. Councillor Goward, you had your hand raised, then we'll go to Councillor Ferrier, and then if anybody else has it, just raise your hand. I'll write your name down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Brandon. Matt, when he was mentioning about option 3, said that shipping containers needed an engineered drawing. And shipping containers under 108 square feet are just considered a shed, basically. And they wouldn't need an engineered drawing, would they? Just the larger ones? Is that what we're talking about? And my question is, why would they need an engineered drawing if somebody's going to come in and drop one in their backyard or their beside their barn or whatever?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Gower, thank you for that. So yes, if it's under that 108 square feet, it wouldn't need an engineered drawing. That's typical for any structure that doesn't need a building permit under that size. Anything above and beyond that, it's a safety measure under the Ontario Building Code that it requires some sort of engineered drawing. It's typical of kind of any sort of structure that way. There may be some conversations that we're going to have with our building folks, obviously, to make sure that kind of the level of application or the required drawings that they're submitting are kind of in line with what they're proposing. Because we understand too, if you're coming in and, like you say, dropping a shipping container on the property, there may be some standardized paperwork that property owner or that company that's dropping it can provide. So there may be some boxes that we can check in that regard, just to make sure that things aren't too complicated for folks. But it's definitely something that we are considering and looking into a bit further.
Right. And when you say engineered drawing, these structures are already built to certain standards. They may come across the ocean and 50 times before they retire them. I don't know what the specs are for that, but when you say engineered, then is it more like a little site plan of where they're going on the property?
I would include that, Councillor Gower, but it also may include kind of like building fabrication, engineering kind of drawings that way. So just to make sure that the structure of the structure itself of the shipping container is appropriate for what it's being used for, and that it's safe for those property owners to use.
I see. And will there be some sort of measure in there? The one in the picture certainly looks very nice on our package. However, some of them are pretty ugly, to be blunt. They're rusty and the paint is awful. And is there going to be anything in there to address that?
So that's a great question as well. So zoning often isn't the best place for aesthetic control. It can control the character of a structure. So we just need to make sure that we wouldn't cross that line. There are some design tools that we can use to control that. And we're setting up that foundation with the new official plan. So things like site plan control can kind of control the aesthetic more. But generally speaking as well, we do have our property standards bylaw, which looks at kind of the upkeep of structures. And we can just look at making sure that all of those are kind of aligned, those tools, to adequately address, to make sure that the shipping container looks appropriate where it's being placed.
Well, thank you for that, because I know I did have a complaint about 2 not so pleasant looking shipping containers. So thank you.
Councilor Perrier, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Brandon. 2 questions, if I may. The first being, do we have any input from our fire department on the safety piece when it comes to fire risks and that piece?
We do indeed. So they are circulated this portion of the application, and we'll be looking for specific comments from them as well. And our building division does work directly with our fire folks, just based on the building code and how that interacts with fire suppression and fire safety.
And through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for that, Brendan. But I wanted to ask about the piece Councillor Howes was talking about a little bit. You know, I don't mind the idea of these being used to support our home-based business legislation that we've recently passed and things like that. But where does that piece come into play in terms of having that piece where we want to support home-based businesses, and also what if somebody wants to use it as a deck or as an office to have their meeting from, or whatever it might be? You know, can you maybe, I know some of that's in the report, some of it isn't, but can you speak to that a little bit at this time for those watching at home?
Absolutely. So thank you for that, through the chair. So the way that the regulatory approach is right now is very rigid in that respect. So there is not that flexibility available to us. And that's part of why I think we're going to undertake some good public education and public input or engagement, just to see kind of where we can draw that line, so to speak, that threshold of what is an appropriate use for a shipping container and what maybe isn't an appropriate use for the shipping container. We have had interest, like you said, through the ARUs. They've been mentioned, as well as the home-based businesses. We get inquiries about pools and shipping containers, even just storage facilities for folks as an affordable way to place something on their property as a shed. So it's a matter of taking all of that into account. And I think coming to council or to committee with this suggestion to at least look at this approach, how we're doing it right now and change it, is kind of the first step in that. And we do obviously encourage the public to provide us direct feedback. And we are looking at some of the situations we've seen in the past with complaints and that, and the trends related to those, just to make sure that we're kind of looking at it all comprehensively.
Maybe just by way of suggestion, if I could, Councillor Miller or Chair Miller, when we do present to the public on this, I wonder if it might be great to have numerous examples of how they are being used, whether they be in conformity or not. I know in Ward 2, there's one that it's used as a kid's climbing wall, and in a good way. I mean, and to talk to Councillor Gatward's point about complaints, and I understand that piece very much, and I get that, but by the same token, showing the creative uses, I think the trend has changed over time. In 2015, Brantford was banning them because of the blight of how they looked on Herbert Street, etc. And I think the public perception's come a long way in terms of the usefulness for home-based business, farming, storage, but also play structure. So that property standards piece, that piece, like the same way somebody could complain about the look of a shed, the aesthetic of a shed or a deck or a lawn, people will be able to develop some sort of property standard piece to help people make specific complaints if they're warranted, but not just complain that they're there and they don't like them. Is that the basis here?
Right? I think he's nodding his head.
Okay, good enough for me.
Yeah,
I'll take
sorry.
that
No,
now.
that's absolutely correct. And we as staff too, in those of us who live in the county, we see the different uses of them around, regardless of their legality. But I think recognizing that there might need to be a bit of a change with the approach and just seeing where to draw that line. That's the intention of these changes. And even if we don't make any changes to this zoning bylaw, and getting some more public feedback with the new official plan and the next comprehensive zoning bylaw, we can always work changes into that as well.
Okay, any other questions for Brandon from the committee on the presentation or the report? Councillor Wheat, go ahead.
It's not a question, but it's a comment. Am I allowed a comment?
Yes, absolutely.
Because I think I should comment after you get it on the floor. It's not on the floor yet.
Okay, we'll get it on the floor in a second. We're going to finish up with questions first, though. Any other questions for Brandon at this time from the committee? Okay, I don't see any hands, so I'm going to ask for a motion then to receive. Moved by Councillor Pierce, second by Councillor Coleman. Comments, Councillor Wheat. Yeah, go ahead.
My comment is I'd get rid of them, period. Shipping containers are for what it says. They're for shipping, the transportation of goods. They're like a truck that can go in the ocean on a boat or come from a long distance, like out west. You're moving in, you're moving your container, you're moving your furniture in. Give them X number of days to get it unloaded out of their driveway. Or if they're moving out, give them X number of days to get it loaded and then get it gone. It's a shipping container, period. And that's what it was designed for. And that's what it should be used for. And I think if you get rid of them, you'll solve a lot of your problems.
Okay, and just keep in mind too, Councillor Wheat, I mean, that's what Brandon's here this evening. It's part of getting some clarity about what he's looking at, but also to get some feedback. Councillor Ferrier, you had your hand up?
Yeah, just to get on the record, I disagree with Councillor Wheat, but I understand the piece. I mean, in Ward 2, we don't get a lot of complaints about them per se, and there are a number of them. But I do think we've asked people to be really resilient, especially about space. And I think this is another option. And if you sit on social services, I mean, we literally have supported a joint county city tiny home case home study, a project, I should say, that uses a shipping container style model. We have modular homes. We have a modular opportunities with modular concrete business in the community. We've had people offer to help us with case housing, and we're desperately needing affordable housing, and shipping containers are not as affordable as people think, but they're a lot more affordable than 12-story buildings, et cetera. So I think there are a lot of uses for them. I think people, when they do complain, they complain more about the aesthetic, or they complain, as Councillor Wheat's rightfully pointing out, that somebody wants it as a shipping, as a, you know, I'm going to move, but I'm going to move in maybe 6 months, a year or 2 years. That type in front of your driveway is one thing, but the types I see in our community where people are using them for like I said, play structures, et cetera, they're using them as sheds or they're using them as modular offices. I think there is something there, and I do support them. I just think that we need, as Councillor House said, a more balanced approach on them and clarity overall. But I think there's a big debate maybe in the community, and there might be a big debate on council, and that's okay.
That's why we're here. Any other comments or questions? Okay, okay, we'll go to Mayor Bailey and then we'll go to Councillor Cole.
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chair. I think we need to treat this maybe going forward the same way we treat fences, where it doesn't really matter what the pretty side of anything is. We need to be very careful that the neighbors don't have to look at the backside or the butt end or the side of something that looks like a railroad car. I'll tell you that if my neighbor put up 2 shipping containers next to me, and it looked very nice at the opening end for him to use it as a pool house or as a bar or whatever he's using it for, and he makes it look pretty for his application, and I have to see the side of 2 railroad cars, I think we better be very aware that those kinds of complaints are going to come up weekly, and they have merit, because I mean, to ruin when these things become taller than your fences, and we have bylaws that say when you put up a fence, you have to be aware of what the fence looks like for the neighbor. And I think we're going to have to put a piece of that into these shipping containers, because, there's going to be a lot of unhappy campers. And I think we need to know that now. No matter how clever they are, there's always a good side to everything, and the good side usually isn't facing across the fence.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with somewhat of Councillor Wheat, and I agree somewhat with Mayor Bailey. This is going to cause a huge disagreement in the county on what the usage of these shipping containers are. And I think it was mentioned by Councillor Howes about one parked in somebody's yard, and they're going to move, but it sits there for 6 months to 9 months or whatever, and it never moves. But what about the ones that have been there 20 years that have never caused a problem? Are they going to be grandfathered? And I know this will come down later down back in November when we come back for another report or whenever. But are they going to be grandfathered in or what? Because they haven't been causing any problem as it is. And then all of a sudden this is really bothered me, how far this could be going. And it was just sent to me in a note. Are you guys going to come after us dairy farmers that got calf hutches out in our yards? Are they considered containers too? So be careful where you push all this stuff.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Coleman. I think you're not looking for an answer or anything from staff right now, but you're just bringing up questions that they need to consider. Okay. Any other comments before we move to proceed? Okay, I don't see any hands up, so yeah, I'll draw this to a conclusion, and thank you, Brandon. Looks like you got some work ahead of us. I did like the fact that you talked about maybe some of these things didn't need to be addressed in a zoning bylaw amendment. There were other ways of addressing it, so sometimes we can be a little more creative, I guess. So again, appreciate the presentation, and yeah, look forward to your next report. So we've got it on the floor and seconded, so I'll call it. All in favor of receiving for information? Opposed? Any? Okay, I don't see any. Okay, so that concludes public hearings under the Plan Act to receive information from the public. This will bring us up to Section 8. And tonight we have 3 hearings under the Planning Act to consider staff recommendations. So of the 3, the first one is 8.1, Report -21-257, and this is ZBA 2921 Sawyer for 12 Maple Ave. Ryan, you are up, so whenever you're ready, you can share your screen and I'll let you know when it's done.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just confirm you can hear me okay? Thank you.
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
And yeah, you're sharing now, right?
All right, very good. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. The subject lands are located on the east side of Maple Avenue South, north of Norwich Road, within the geographic township of Burford. Surrounding lands mainly consist of farmed fields and agricultural uses, as well as single detached residential uses. The applicant is undertaking this rezoning application as a condition of approval of severance application B66-20-RC. This surplus dwelling severance application was presented and approved by the Committee of Adjustment in April of 2021. As a condition of that consent, conditions pertaining to the rezoning of the subject lands were required to be fulfilled, for which this application has been filed. The intent of this application is to rezone the retained farm parcel to special exception agricultural A-180. This site-specific zone will prohibit a dwelling as a condition of the approval for the surplus dwelling severance. And that will also recognize the undersized farm parcel with an area of approximately 36 hectares. The application will also result in the rezoning of the severed dwelling lot from a special exception agricultural A-18 to the standard agricultural A zone, That's in order to remove abattoirs as permitted uses. There's some historical permissions there that we wanted to clean up. It is noted that the applicant is not incurring additional costs to recognize the undersized nature of the retained lands. The application was required, although for the A9 or the what really is the A180 zone to prohibit a dwelling as a condition of the consent. Staff is of the opinion that the proposed rezoning is consistent with the provincial policy statement, is in conformity with the growth plan, conforms to the County of Brant official plan, and meets the intent of the County of Brant zoning bylaw. Staff is therefore recommending that this application be approved. Thank you. That concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
All right, thank you, Ryan. Are there any questions for the planner at this time? I don't see any hands up. I do have one question, Ryan. And when this is looked at by the Committee of Adjustment, if I look at the aerial photo, it looks like there has been a severance on this property already, in the opposite corner. Is that taken into consideration at all by anybody? You or?
Not generally, Mr. Chair, through you. As we're aware, previous provincial planning policies, and we're talking from, the maybe prior to the 90s, allowed for retirement lot severances as we know them. These days, our provincial policies are much more strict with respect to the creation or the severance of residential lots within the agricultural zone. We as a staff look for the indicator of that A9 zone, which is supposed to remain in perpetuity on the retained lands. And given that this lot had the agricultural zone in place, there was no indication that there were previous applications that would, prohibit this type of surplus severance. And I guess what I can say is that this would be the last one, provided that the provincial policies don't change going forward. And certainly don't see that happening.
Okay, thank you very much. If I don't see any hands up, I'm going to ask if the agent or the applicant are here this evening and would like to speak to this.
Hi there, Eddie Vance through the chair. I have no further comments after Ryan's report. I think it's pretty clear. I know Chuck was on the call. He is out of the city. I don't know if he has anything to add.
Mr. Vance, can you just identify, are you, sorry, what's your role in this?
I'm the agent for the applicant. I'm a lawyer at Watrous Holden.
Okay, thank you. Just so the clerk can identify that. All right. So if you got no further comments, then Mr. Vance, what I'll do is there anyone from the committee that has a question then for Mr. Vance at this time? Okay, seeing none. Hold on one second, and I'll turn to our clerk and I'll ask Alicia. I'll open this up to the public, but Alicia, are you aware if there's anyone from the public here this evening that wishes to speak to this application?
Mr. Chairman, no, to my knowledge, there is not.
Okay, thank you. I will ask a second time if there's anyone from the public that wishes to speak to this application. I'll ask a third time if there's anyone from the public that wishes to speak to this application. Seeing and hearing none, I will close this part of the meeting off to the public, and I'll bring it back to the committee, and I'll ask if there's someone from the committee that would like to move it. Moved by Councillor Chambers, seconded by Mayor Bailey. Any questions or comments before we call a question? Okay, see, I just have one comment myself, and I'm just wondering, in the short run, this A9 policy that we have here in the county, I think it works for the current owners, obviously, because they applied for it. But in the long run, I do question the impacts of this policy of creating large parcels of farmland where no farmer can ever live, right? Who farms the land at this point? It tends to skew, I think it skews it towards larger and larger operations at the expense of smaller farmers trying to get into the industry. And I had a good conversation a couple of years ago with a very frustrated young farmer from Oxford about this very issue. He wanted to buy some farmland in Brant, but he couldn't because he couldn't live there and it was too far to transport his equipment. So, like I say, I look at this policy, I see the good. I realize we're trying to protect our farmland, but I do wonder about the long-term effects. So I don't know if that's something maybe down the road we could at least talking about, but I'll leave it for now. And I do know we got a very similar one in section 8.3, but at least it looks like that one will be farmed by a neighbor. So I will call the question then. All in favor of 8.1? Opposed, if any? Okay, that carries. Mr. Vance, this will go to our council meeting, our regular council meeting on November 23rd for final approval. Okay. So you
Thank
can
you very much.
let your client know. Thank you for coming.
Have a great night.
Okay, this will bring us up to 8.2, report 21-253. Oh, this is an official plan amendment 1-21 and the zoning bylaw amendment 5-21 from Lafarge at 1044 Colburn Street West. Kayla, your screen is up, and you go ahead and start presenting when you're ready.
Thank you. This is an application for an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for lands located at 1044 Colbert Street West in the former geographic township of Brantford. The application has been submitted by MHBC Planning on behalf of Lafarge Canada. The application is being presented tonight for recommendation. The applicant is proposing to change the official plan land use designation from agricultural to resource and to change the zoning from agricultural to resource extraction to permit the extension of the existing Lafarge aggregate pit located directly east of the subject lands. Similarly to the existing pit, extraction is proposed to occur above and below the established water table and will occur sequentially in 3 phases. The subject lands are located along the south side of Colburn Street West and have a total area of 19 hectares or 49 acres. The property currently contains an existing dwelling and is primarily used for agricultural production at this time. As part of the complete application, the applicant has submitted several supporting studies, including a hydrogeological report, natural environmental report, archaeological assessment, noise assessment, air quality study, traffic operations assessment, agricultural impact assessment, as well as a planning justification report. The lands are currently designated agricultural in the official plan. Aggregate resource extraction is recognized as an important secondary use in the agricultural area. Planning staff have reviewed this application as it relates to the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, and the official plan. The County of Brant official plan does provide policy direction as it relates to aggregate resources. The proposed pit extension ensures that the county is able to take advantage of the high quality resources in the area while ensuring that the lands are rehabilitated in the long term. Planning staff are satisfied that mitigation measures are in place to ensure development proceeds in a manner that serves the public interest. The proposed site plan identifies and implements all of the recommendations of the noise and air quality assessments, which includes berms, setbacks, processing restrictions, and mitigation measures. Additionally, the proposed site plan has been developed to ensure that all the requirements of the provincial standards are met. The subject lands are currently zoned agriculture. According to Section 6 of the zoning bylaw, the mineral aggregate operations are not identified as a permitted use within the A zone, and therefore this application is required to rezone the lands to permit the use. The application was circulated to various internal and external agencies. The comments have all been addressed by the agent. There have been 2 public comments received early on in this process, and they have been attached for your information this evening. The agent has responded to the public comments and no further feedback has been received. The image on the screen shows the proposed site plan, which is approved through the Aggregate Resources Act, also known as the ARA process, rather than through the municipal site plan process. In summary, the official plan and zoning amendment request is consistent with the provincial policy statement and the growth plan, as the policies contemplate for aggregate resource extraction on prime agricultural lands, provided that the proper mechanisms are in place to ensure compatibility and proper rehabilitation. The ARA process is the additional mechanism to ensure that the site developments as per the plan. The official plan and zoning request conforms to the official plan criteria for aggregate resource extraction within the rural area and on prime agricultural lands. As this application proposes to amend the OP and zoning to permit the use and will be subject to recommendations of the reports and studies to ensure it develops in an appropriate manner. The planning justification and recommendation in the report is supported by the comments received as part of the technical circulation to internal and external agencies. Technical comments are also reflect the understanding that details related to the drainage, grading, rehabilitation, noise, and buffering will be facilitated through subsequent permits and the ARA site plan approval process. It is my professional opinion that the request is appropriate and represents good planning, and therefore I recommend the official plan and zoning amendment application be approved. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, appreciate that, Kayla. Any questions from the committee for the planner? Okay, I see Councillor Gatward, then we'll go to Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Kayla, I have two questions. The first one is on page 7 of 18 of the report. At the very bottom, it states that a spills contingency plan be developed. And I'm wondering, will the spills contingency plan be approved by Cambion or our Director of Water?
Through the chair to Councillor Gatward. So that question is related to source water protection. Typically, it wouldn't, I don't believe it would be dealt with through the county, but I do have the agent here, Caitlin from MHBC, and she would likely be able to provide the answers to that, as I am guessing that it is through the Aggregate Resources Act process.
Okay, well, Caitlin, hold on a second. We'll get to the answer to that. Just write that down and we'll get to the answer later. Councillor Gatward, what's your second question, please?
The second question is, there was no mention of dust mitigation. I've had complaints from people that live across the road about dust in the summertime. And will that be dealt with through the site plan to ensure in dry 2 or 3 week areas where there's no rain, that they'll ensure their driveways and the roadway is cleared from anything that's tracked onto the roadway to help prevent the dust?
Through the chair to Councillor Gatward, that is another great question for the agent.
Okay, hold on to those, John. We'll ask. But she did ask Kayla, what would that be part of the site plan?
Through the chair, yes, that is my understanding. The site plan takes all the recommendations of the studies and implements them through the site plan. So although the site plan is not a municipal process in this case, the ARA process would ensure that the site plan takes into account the recommendations of the reports.
Okay, yeah, I think I knew that the site plan is not part of what we do. We don't sign off on the site plan, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay, because it's a gravel pit, so it's covered under the ARA. Okay, Councillor Joan, we'll circle back here, don't get me wrong. Councillor Chambers, any questions further? You had your hand up.
Yes, I did. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the planner. I'm just wondering, from a planner's perspective, how do you reconcile the requirement for rehabilitation with extraction below the water table? In other words, how do you explain in terms of rehabilitation to agricultural land, aggregate operations that end up as water ponds?
Through the chair, so the applicant is proposing below water table extraction. And so as part of that, their rehabilitation plan is then again, obviously much different than one that was not below the water table. So it's my understanding that in this case, the only option is to have open water features and naturalized areas as part of the final rehabilitation plan. And there are certain criteria that the applicants look at in terms of below water table extraction. And I believe Caitlin can expand on some of those criteria that they've looked at in this situation.
Okay, Councillor Chambers, any other questions at the moment?
So just obviously then there is a loss of agricultural land with this application.
Yeah, through the chair, the lands won't be brought back into agricultural production. That's
Okay, Kayla, sorry. You said the lands will be brought back into agricultural production. That's not true.
no, sorry, I said they will not be brought back
Will
in.
not be. Yeah, okay. I misheard. Yes, they will not be. I didn't want that to go not. Anyways, okay. Any other questions for our planner at this time? Councillor Goward, we're still got those other two questions of yours, but you have another one for the planner. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure if, through you, Mr. Chair, if Kayla will be able to answer this or not. Maybe it'll have to go to the applicant. How large will that pond be? I think I read that it will be connected to the other pond on the first stage of the gravel pit when it's finally mined out, and that they wanted to connect the two. Is the pond going to be 10 acres or how large? And would it be able to provide irrigation water for nearby farmers?
Through the chair to Councillor Gatward, I would direct that comment to Caitlin, the agent for the application.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for our planner at this time? Okay, I don't see anything, so I'm going to ask the agent. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bell, you go ahead. If it's for the planner, I guess. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the planner. This pit has been in operation for quite some time. What position do we as a county take when it's clear when a pit is open that there will be future expansion, and yet at the time of agreeing to the first pit, the second piece, the expansion, is not considered? I think we're making a fundamental mistake here. We are going to take prime agricultural land out of circulation. When I think about the fights we have when it comes to taking land out of circulation for residential purposes, this is going by like a breeze. And I find it inappropriate that we don't give it the same degree of concern as we do for residential changes. And I will not support this.
Kayla, can you help out Councillor Bell as far as this one and the first one?
Sure. So on page 5 and page 6 of my report, it speaks to the consideration for alternative locations. And so that is one of the policies that we look at and a consideration when we're looking at the expansion of the pit. And so in the report, I do note that the applicant has considered the fact that this is the expansion of an existing pit, and therefore it would be more favorable as the haul routes already exist. The trucks are coming in and out of there daily already. So they did provide some justification as to why it was more appropriate to expand an existing pit abutting this location versus an entirely new location. And it does serve the local construction community as well.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think what we're doing is we're sort of justifying it to ourselves here. I don't think it's an absolute justification. I think it's a relative justification. Again, I don't feel comfortable with it.
Okay, no, I appreciate that, but Councillor Bell, wait till we're in deliberations for that. Right now, we're just looking for questions, okay, for clarification. Any other questions for the planner before we go to the applicant? I don't see any hands up, so I will ask if the agent or the applicant is here this evening to speak to this. Caitlin, I'm going to guess that you are one of them anyways?
Yes, that's correct. Can you hear me okay, Chair Miller?
Yes, I can. Can you just
Okay.
identify yourself and who you work for our clerk? For the record?
Certainly. Caitlin Port, I am a planner with MHBC, representing Lafarge, Canada. And I'm joined tonight by Carol Sigmankowski, hopefully I got that right, Carol, who is the land manager for Lafarge operations in this part of the province.
Hi, good evening.
There we go. I do have about a 10-minute presentation, if that would be, if I could throw that up on the screen and work through that with you guys. And then I've noted Councillor Gatward's questions, Councillor Chambers' questions, and then the comments by Councillor Bell as well. I'm sure Carol and I would be happy to respond to those comments and questions.
Okay, so you got a presentation you're sharing then?
Yeah,
Okay.
let me just bring it up here.
Just
bear with me one moment. I'm just gonna make it full screen here so you get the full experience. There you go.
Yep, I got it now. So
excellent.
Anytime you're ready.
Okay, so as I mentioned, my name's Caitlin. I'm a professional planner with MHBC, and I am representing Lafarge, Canada for the proposed official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment to permit the extension to the Lafarge Brantford pit. So Kayla in her presentation already gave a fantastic overview, so I think I'm just going to whip through this pretty quickly. The one thing I would add is that, yes, this property is currently in active agricultural production. It's cash cropped and has been for quite a number of years. There is a small single detached building on the property adjacent to Colburn Street with a few outbuildings. And then you'll also see on the air photo there that there is a man-made dugout pond, which was investigated through the natural environment field work and was determined to not be any sort of significant natural heritage feature. This area is sort of an interesting area of the county of Brant. It is predominantly rural and agricultural. However, there's sort of an interesting mix of rural residential uses, some commercial uses, and a bit of light industrial as well. So again, Kayla gave us a fantastic overview in her presentation. So I'll just add a little bit to what Kayla's already provided to you. The purpose of this extension is to replace the depleting reserves at the existing pit. And that is so that the existing pit and then concurrently the pit extension will continue to supply predominantly high quality granular products to Brantford and the surrounding area. And these products are used primarily locally and primarily for road construction and infrastructure projects. Extraction will occur in 3 sequential phases in the pit extension, starting in the south end and proceeding north. And as extraction limits are reached in each of those phases, progressive rehabilitation will closely follow. And both above and below water table extraction is proposed in the pit extension, which is what is occurring in the existing pit right now. So because the purpose of this pit extension is to replace the depleting reserves in the existing pit, there's no increase to production, there's no increase to annual tonnage. It's pretty much, if you remember the air photo I showed on the previous slide, we're just sliding things over to the west, and that existing pit will be rehabilitated. So we're also not increasing any disturbed area. However, we are going to make use of the existing pit's existing entrance and exit onto Colburn Street, as well as the scales. And this was Councillor Gatwick, I believe, noted this, that the final land use is proposed to be a lake. That lake will be joined with the existing pit. And we're also proposing to create some shallow areas in the north end of the pit extension, as well as some nodal tree plantings, tree and shrub plantings to do a bit of ecological enhancement in that area. So there were a number of technical studies that were completed, and these studies were submitted to the county for the Planning Act applications. And these studies were also submitted to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry as part of the Aggregate Resources Act license application. And all of the recommendations from those studies have been included on the Aggregate Resources Act site plan. Through the ARA process and also through the Planning Act process, these studies have been circulated and reviewed by various county departments, Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, the GRCA, OMAFRA has also reviewed this application, the Ministry of the Environment, and also the Ministry of Tourism, Heritage, Culture, and Sport. I think I got that right. And these studies have also been made available for public review on the Lafarge Brantford website. All the comments that we have received through this circulation have been addressed over the last few months, and any changes have been, there's been a number of changes made to the site plan, which I'll review in a couple slides. So as I mentioned, there's also been an Aggregate Resources Act license application submission, because in order to operate a pit in Ontario, you need the appropriate municipal land use approvals, as well as a license from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. We submitted that application pretty much at the same time that we submitted the official plan amendment and the zoning bylaw amendment. The MNRF deemed that application complete in March 2021, and then we proceeded with the notification circulation requirements of the Aggregate Resources Act in the spring of 2021. We did not receive any public comments through that ARA consultation process. However, we did receive some technical site plan comments from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, and we're continuing to have ongoing discussions with the MNRF just to resolve those technical site plan comments. And just as an important note, that the license cannot be issued by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry until the appropriate municipal land use approvals are in place. So that's the designation of zoning. And we're also required to address all agency and public comments as well. So I went through this a bit back in April, but Lafarge did undertake both public and Indigenous community consultation. There was an initial round of consultation conducted by Lafarge in the fall of 2020 before these applications were formally made. And then, as I mentioned, we've also worked through the ARA notification and consultation requirements, as well as the Planning Act consultation requirements. And the ARA consultation requirements are similar to the Planning Act consultation requirements in that they require a notice sign to be posted on the property. There was a notice posted in the Brantford newspaper in April. We did circulate notification letters to adjacent landowners, and Lafarge and myself have also made ourselves available to meet with any members of the public who may have questions or concerns about the application. There's also a public website that has all the reports available for download, as well as contact information. And we've also consulted with the local Indigenous communities as well, which is a requirement of the provincial approval, as it does trigger the duty to consult. And as Kayla mentioned, we did engage with a number of members of the public, and that was back in April, around in the spring, and we haven't received any further communication from them since that time. This is just a screenshot of some of the public consultation materials. There was a handout that was delivered, as well as a screenshot of the website. So as I mentioned, through the circulation of the application, we did receive a number of comments, and we made changes to the application to address those comments. So we have tightened up some of that site plan language and clarified the notes to make sure that they're consistent with the Aggregate Resources Act standards. We have specifically to address a county comment, we have added a tree screen along Colburn Street and ensured that those trees will be maintained and replaced should they fail to establish. There's also a monitoring and replacement program in place for the additional tree and shrub planting that we'll be doing in the north end as part of those ecological enhancements. We've specified on the site plan that all the plantings that will be undertaken will be locally native and non-invasive. We've added a note to the site plan that states that no recycling shall occur on the pit extension, and also added an additional note that requires that all the topsoil and the overburden on that property remain on site and be used in both progressive and final rehabilitation. And we've also clarified the notes on the site plan, and this might help to answer Councillor Gatwick's question. We've clarified and added notes to the site plan that pertain to the operating standards for dust management as outlined in Ontario Regulation 24497. And that's the regulations under the Aggregate Resources Act. This is just a screenshot of the operations plan. The red text is the changes that we've made since you first saw this site plan back in April. And those are some of the changes. Again, just the red text is highlighting the changes we've made to the rehabilitation plan. So thank you. And I know there's questions from committee members, so Carol and I will be pleased to answer those questions.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. So I'm going to start off first with Councillor Gatward. Councillor Gatward, did you feel your questions were answered? You asked the question about dust mitigation, surface water protection, and how large were the ponds? If you want to ponder for a bit. Okay. I'll ask the rest of the committee. Does anybody have any questions for the applicant at this time? Okay, we'll go to Councillor Howes first. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I'm evaluating this and looking at the public engagement side of things. I see a communication that we received within our package directly to us. You mentioned the steps that you took to engage with the public, and you mentioned that engagement resulted in some changes to your plans. Can you anecdotally tell us a little bit more about have the changes that you have made resolved the issues that were expressed from the public in your efforts?
Yeah, through you, Chair Miller, to Councillor Howes. Most of the comments we received were actually agency comments. We did receive some comments from the public as well back in April. Those comments did not result in any specific changes to the application, although I do feel that some of the changes we made would help to resolve those initial comments we did receive, specifically adding additional tree screens along Colburn Street. But the public comments we received back in April, we did engage in back and forth correspondence with those members of the public, and there was no specific changes that were made to address some of their initial comments. Their comments were more along the lines of disagreeing with the land use as a whole, rather than there being specific changes that we could make to address their concerns.
Quick follow-up, Mr. Chair. Can we ask how many people engaged from the public engaged with you on this?
Sure. Yeah, through you, Chair Miller, to Councillor Howes. Through the Planning Act, I am aware of 2 members of the public who provided comments to, I believe it was County Planning Department, and those comments were then forwarded to myself and to Lafarge. And we did, like I said, engage with both of those members of the public. We did not through the Aggregate Resources Act, which also has additional consultation requirements. We did not through the Aggregate Resources Act receive any public comments.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other? Okay, Councillor Gatward, go ahead. And going back, circling back to your question, Councillor Gatward, that you had earlier about dust mitigation, source water protection, and the size of the ponds, were they answered or no?
I don't believe so, although I was having technical difficulties. Caitlin was freezing up during her presentation. I don't know if anybody else had that happen to them. And I think once I was booted off and lost and came back on. So I think I missed some of her comments. But yeah, I wanted to know how large the pond would be when the whole project is complete. And also the spills contingency plan that's going to be developed. Does that come to Cambion, our source water protection consultant and the director of our water at the county, the spills contingency plan? And are they notified if there's a spill? That's all I have. Thank you.
Did you get Caitlin?
Yes, we did. Chair Miller, I think these questions may be appropriate for Carol to answer. I can't see her on my screen, but I know she's available to answer these questions.
Yeah,
in
I
terms
see her
of,
in mine. So Carol, anytime you want to jump in.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Carol.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Through you, Chair Miller. Regarding the wellhead protection question, Lafarge has a spills contingency plan that is across all our sites. I would like to preface that by saying aggregate extraction is not a land use that is a threat to drinking water. So, but we obviously do have a heavy equipment on the site. So we do have still contingency plan at site specific for each site to address any of those concerns. And in addition to that, as part of the license application, we do have a water monitoring program that is detailed on the site plan. So water will be monitored as extraction takes place, which should help with any kind of concerns regarding water. I don't have, I'm sorry, the size of the pond, but I believe Caitlin does.
I was just going to say, I know that the extension pond will be around just under 17 hectares, probably about 16 hectares once we include the side slope. I can't recall what the size of the existing pit pond will be, unfortunately, but that's information we're happy to provide in a follow-up discussion if needed.
So 16, 17 hectares, which is like 35 acres.
The bulk of the property.
And can it
Councillor
be,
Gatward,
can
yeah,
it
you
be
also had a question.
for
Sorry, you also had
irrigation?
Can it be used for irrigation? Yes, for nearby agricultural operations.
Yeah, through you, Chair Miller, to Councillor Gatwick. That's an interesting question that we could certainly investigate, and would, I mean, local farmers could certainly engage with further discussions with Lafarge if they require the water source for irrigation. I would imagine that would require ECA approvals to pump that water. So that would potentially require approvals through the Ministry of the Environment, but I mean, it's something we could potentially explore. I know that there are pits that are used for firefighting purposes as sources of water. So I'm not sure if Carol has anything to add to that.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin, through you, Mr. Chair. Just to add to that, I think that's definitely something Lafarge can look into. There might be some hoops to jump through, like Caitlin mentioned, through depending on the amount of water that needs to be pumped out. But I would be happy to discuss that further.
Okay, so we don't know for sure, but it's something that could be looked at. Okay, appreciate it. Any other questions from the committee members to the presenters? We'll go with Councillor Bell first and then Councillor Chambers next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Caitlin. I'm looking at page 103 of the report that the staff gave us. It shows the existing license and then to the west, the proposed extension. What does the geological mapping say about the extent of the aggregate resource? Does it continue to the east? Does it go to the south? Will this be the last extension?
Through you, Chair Miller, to Councillor Bell. I'm just familiar with the geological resource on the extension property, and that was more extensively studied by Lafarge. And again, this may be a better question for Carol to answer. I'm not too sure the extent of the geological deposit. That is information that is mapped provincially by the province and is contained in the aggregate resource inventory papers. And I know that the county is currently undertaking their official plan review process right now to incorporate that aggregate mapping, ARIP mapping, into their official plan schedules. So I would encourage you, because unfortunately I don't know off the top of my head the extent of the mapping, but that mapping would be available in the draft official plan schedules. And again, I'd ask if Carol has anything to add
Carol,
to that.
I'll ask
Yes.
her too, because Councillor Bell, that was my question I had written down. So what's the aggregates like past this property or around in the general vicinity?
Again, like Caitlin, I'm sorry, I don't have the exact mapping in front of me, but what I will say is that even with that mapping, we conduct our own testing to verify the resource, the quality and quantity. So that's something that would have to be done in addition to confirm there's actually an aggregate resource there.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, so you can't give me a definitive answer. If I'd asked you this question when you opened up the first pit, was the land to the due west going to be developed? You would have not been able to tell me at that time either. Is that correct?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, what I would say is that like part of understanding the resource is purchasing the property too. So to say where we would expand and how we'd expand is all based on land holdings as well. So that would have been a difficult question to answer at the time because that land was purchased quite recently.
Okay, plus you two weren't around then either. So we'll go to Councillor Chambers next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you to the presenters. I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the rehabilitation plan, both in terms of the existing pit and proposed pit, in terms of timing and in terms of end use, what the end use will be, and anything else that you can tell me about 35 years from now, what's that place is going to be like.
Through you, Chair Miller, to Councillor Chambers. Yes, thank you for that question about rehabilitation. So the rehabilitation plan for the pit extension is page 3 of the Aggregate Resources Act site plan. And I do believe that a copy of that site plan is included in your package. So the final land use is proposed to be a lake, and that lake will be connected with the existing pit. Sorry, I apologize about my dog barking in the background. So the pit extension will be connected to the existing pit. It will be a lake surrounded by naturalized shorelines. There will be some shallow shorelines created. And then specifically in the pit extension in the south end, we're proposing to do some ecological enhancements, including the creation of some shallow littoral areas and nodal tree and shrub plantings.
Councillor Chambers?
Just in terms of creating a lake, which really has no use whatsoever other than to perhaps raise fish and be a aquatic habitat and for waterfowl, etc. In terms of enhancing a wetland, maybe you can give examples of what can be done in terms of rehabilitation of gravel pits that extract below the water surface, because there are some examples around the province. Even Lafarge itself has rehabilitation plans that do more than just create a body of water that people will look at, but in this case it's going to be bermed off so nobody can see it. It'll just be basically a pool of water that has no use whatsoever in terms of agriculture in terms of anything but aquatic habitat. So maybe you can just expand on that a little bit. Is there something you can do a little bit more than just create a lake?
Carol or Caitlin?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a stab at answering that question as well. This is a bit of an interesting property. We did originally have some initial discussions with county staff when we first engaged in pre-consultation about trying to do a little bit more than what we're presenting, a little bit more in terms of ecological enhancements to perhaps create something that will be part of perhaps the county's larger natural heritage system. The challenge with this site is that it is located in the wellhead protection area. So in discussions with the county's risk management officer, they did want to keep as much deep water as possible. So we've done our best to incorporate ecological enhancements where feasible and where possible, but we're also trying to maintain as much deep water as possible just to ensure that that water quality is maintained in the lake. It is a bit challenging with below water table extraction to come up with sort of innovative or different rehabilitation uses. But there are, as Councillor Chambers mentioned, there are some really good examples of aggregate rehabilitation that does include large water bodies, and they do contribute. They can contribute to natural heritage features and functions within the county. Carol, I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add to that.
What I would say is that the rehabilitation does call for a little bit of, I guess, land frontage. So there is a bit of variety and not an entire pond. I think the aggregate industry has come a long way from literally extracting the entire area to a pond. So we have left some frontage there. So there might be an opportunity for something else in the future in that area, the frontage on Coburn Street.
Okay, Councillor Chambers, follow up, or are you good?
That's fine, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to perhaps further exploration of what can be done in terms of rehabilitation, recognizing that the agricultural capability will be rendered useless, and recreationally it may be due to the deepness, et cetera, may be rendered useless. So it's going to end up being probably a naturalized area. And I look forward to maybe some further exploration by Lafarge and some imagination maybe by Lafarge in what can be done, rather than just leave a 100-acre farm a big pond of water.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the committee members for the presenters? Okay, I don't see any hands up. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I will open it up to the public, and I'll ask our clerk, Alicia, if there's anyone from the public that's here this evening to speak to this application.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, there is no one from the public who is waiting to speak on this application.
Okay, thanks, Alicia. I will ask a second time, however, if there's anyone from the public that wishes to speak to this application. And I'll ask a third time if there's anyone from the public that wishes to speak to this application. Okay, hearing and seeing none, I'm going to close this part of the meeting off to the public, and I'm going to bring it back to the committee, and I'm going to ask if I could get someone from the floor to move this recommendation, to get it on the floor. Moved by Councillor Coleman, seconded by Councillor Wheat. Now, does anybody have any comments or questions from any of the members? Councillor Chambers, you got your hand up. Go ahead, please.
And again, I don't want to be repetitious, but I recognize the importance of aggregate in the province, as well as the province recognizes the role of aggregate producers, et cetera. And we've seen many examples where agricultural land is essentially replaced by aggregate rehabilitated properties. I don't have a crystal ball to look into the future, but I would like at the end of the day to see that Lafarge is doing more than just creating a pond of water, as I've said. So in terms of rehabilitation, I think the company can make themselves a good corporate citizen by doing a little bit more, as some aggregate companies have. And there's good examples and bad examples throughout the province of rehabilitated aggregate operations that have gone below the water table. So I know Lafarge itself has there are some excellent examples that Lafarge has done across the province, and I hope this is going to be one of them, rather than something that our grandchildren and successors will be able to say that, gee, that's a nice place, rather than drive by a walled off pond of water that is essentially useless. So hopefully Lafarge will take the initiative and use some of their resources to do something for the community, rather than create a moonscape or a seascape.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Chambers. Councillor Pierce, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, just a comment. It sounds as though Councillor Chambers is talking as if this is already a done deal here, as when he's talking about rehabilitation. The part that gets me on this one here is, as we all know, that there's been many occasions over the last several years and beyond where the province has really cut down on the possibility of taking agricultural land and putting it into residential or employment and that sort of stuff. And yet it seems fairly easy to take a plot of 100+ acres of agricultural land and move it to aggregate. Again, the rehabilitation is part of it, but I think at the end of the day, what could happen here is we could lose 100+ acres of agricultural land that's being used today. Maybe not today, it might be harvested, but it's currently being used as agricultural, and we're going to lose that. I've got a real problem with that, and I'm not sure that I can support this, but I will listen to further comments.
And on that note, we'll go to Councillor LaFerrier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I found it interesting. This is one of those few times we've had issues with aggregate production areas in our community where, look, there's been a 40-year provincial mandate that it must occur. And this is one of those times we at the municipality can actually say no and prevent it. So that's interesting. We don't often have that power, especially with successive provincial governments doing so much around development rules that tend to lean towards and favor developers and development. So this seems to be one of those times that we actually can say no if we choose to. I plan on saying no, along with, it sounds like, Councillor Bell and Councillor Pierce. And I think it's interesting because once it's gone, it's gone, and there doesn't seem to be a good use. And Councillor Chambers is saying that, but there's a the pressure to be good corporate citizens and the hope and the imagination, and I believe that to be true, and I believe that to be very hopeful thinking. But unless we have a mandate where we can actually control what it becomes after, I don't think that will happen generally. And if it does happen with this corporate citizen, it's not assured that it will happen with others. I also worry about in the future more and more adjacent land near pits being taken up this way. So I'm gonna vote against this.
Okay, thank you, Councillor LaFerrier. Any other comments? Councillor Goward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I agree with Councillor Chambers that it would be beneficial to have this area look nice when this is done, and not just a vast wasteland. McGregor Lake is nearby, and I believe that was a mined out pit area, and it is used by the residents that live around there, and they fish and go out in their boats on it. However, there was an issue, it attracts a lot of geese, and there was an issue with hunting that we had to address as a county, so that there wasn't people hunting geese where others were in close proximity and businesses and homes. So when this is all finished, I would like county staff to make a note that this area be considered in the firearms bylaw that we have at the county, so that, because it will most definitely attract our beautiful Canada geese and hunters as well. So I would ask that that be looked at. I understand the need for us to preserve farmland, and certainly this probably will not be popular with the existing homeowners that live to the east of the pit, who sometimes get dust. And I do understand, though, the province's desire for an appetite for gravel, and gravel does build roads and sidewalks and all the infrastructure that we need in the county. And Councillor LaFerriere said, well, we can say no, and that's true. However, the applicant does have the right, I believe, to appeal it, and an appeal would probably, Lafarge would win based on the need for aggregate. It has to come from somewhere, and that's usually where it is, on farmland, unfortunately. And so those are my comments, Mr. Mayor, or sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Galbraith. Okay, any other comments, questions, concerns from the committee? Okay, Councilor Coleman.
At the time, Mr. Mayor, or Mr. Chair, I would call for a recorded vote.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Any other comments? Okay, I don't see Councilor Chambers. You have your hand up?
Yeah, I hope you allow me one more comment, and I recognize that winning appeals is extremely difficult. We went this route in other areas of the county many times, and I'd just like to say I would much rather have money spent by both the applicant and the county on rehabilitation than lawyers and appeals and that kind of thing. I know it you can be lost and never be seen again in appeals in terms of money and in terms of time, but at the end of the day, what makes aggregate operations palatable is what the end use and what the end product is. And it may take a while, but that's again singing the same song. But the key is rehabilitation, and that's where the money should be spent.
Good point as always, Councilor Chambers. Thank you. I don't see any other hands up, so I will make my comment. And I'll start off by saying I am not anti-gravel, so please do not misconstrue my comments. I am, however, pro-County of Brant. And since I've been on this committee, I've seen somewhere in the range of 1,000 acres of farmland lost to gravel extraction. This proposed one will take another 50 acres of Class 2 land, never to return. Existing ratepayers subsidize the gravel business because of the low municipal levies on each ton of gravel extracted. Everybody around this table knows this. So we lose during the extraction. And at the end, when another very productive piece of farmland is gone forever and turned into open ponds, we lose again. And I understand the gravel is needed. And when plans or policies are put in place that protect our ratepayers and our most valuable resource, farmland, then, and only then, should they be allowed to extract it. The civilization is only as healthy as its top 6 inches of soil. So again, I'm not anti-gravel. I'm pro-County of Brant. And on that note, I will not be supporting this application despite the very good presentation done by those ladies tonight. So on that note, we have a mover and a seconder to move the recommendation. And as per Councillor Coleman, it will be a recorded vote. So Alicia, I look to you to run this vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Coleman,
Yes.
Councillor Gatward,
Sorry, forgot to unmute. Yes.
Councillor House,
No.
Councillor Laferriere,
No.
Councillor McAlpine,
No.
Councillor Miller,
I vote no.
Councillor Pierce,
No.
Councillor Wheat,
Yes.
Mayor Bailey,
No.
Councillor Bell,
No.
Councillor Chambers.
Yes.
The motion is defeated.
Okay, so to our presenters, this decision is not final, well, clearly, but it will be going to our council meeting November 20. Oh, wait, no, because there's actually no presentation at that point. So,
Excuse me, Chairman, if I could interject, we do require a motion under the Planning Act. So what you would be looking for is a motion to deny the application.
I know we did that at one point and then we stopped doing that, but Alicia, I'm gonna take your lead on that one. So I'll look for a motion from the floor to deny this application. Moved by Councillor Pierce, second by Councillor Bell. All right. You know what? I'm going to ask for a recorded vote on this one as well, Alicia, just so we can keep it straight. So the motion is to deny the application. Moved and seconded it. And Alicia, can you do a recorded vote for us?
Yes, I can. Chair Miller,
I'll vote yes on that one.
Councillor Pierce,
Yes.
Councillor Wheat,
No.
Mayor Bailey,
Yes.
Councillor Bell,
Yes.
Councillor Chambers,
No.
Councillor Coleman,
No.
Councillor Gatward,
No.
Councillor Howes,
Yes.
Councillor Laferriere,
Yes.
Councillor McAlpine.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you, Alicia. So that recommendation will be going to our council meeting on November 23rd. Okay, so that'll conclude this hearing for this application for this evening. And I will go to my notes, and this will take us to 8.3, report -21-255. This is zoning bylaw amendment 3621 for Martin at 65 Grant Road. And Dan, you're playing on this, so anytime you're ready to start sharing your screen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just pulling up my screen now.
Okay, I see you now, Dan. Okay, anytime you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to confirm, is that looking at full screen for you guys? Nice and clear. Okay.
Yeah, it's good.
So this is a zoning bylaw amendment application for the property located at 65 Brant Road. The applicant is a number company and the agent is represented, or the applicant's represented by the agent, MHBC Planning. I believe Kate Wills is on the call this evening. So this application is for the property, again, 65 Brant Road. The property is located in the southwest corner of Highway 24 and German School Road. The property itself has frontage both along German School Road and Highway 24. The frontage along Highway 24 is approximately just over a kilometer long. It's got an irregular shape and a depth that is just over a kilometer long as well. And the area of this parcel is approximately 136 hectares or 337 acres. The current land use designation in the official plan consists of majority of agricultural land use, as well as the green natural heritage areas. And the current zoning on the property, consistent with the official plan, is agricultural, with the natural heritage zoning identified in green. Similar to Ryan's presentation earlier this evening, this application is proposing to change the zoning on the area identified in red on your screen from agricultural to the agricultural special exception A-9 to prohibit a residential unit as a permitted use. And this is required as a condition of consent application B3821 SL. The surplus dwelling lot shown on identified in blue there in little detail A, showing the severed land. So this surplus dwelling lot is limited in size in order to accommodate the use, sewage and water services. The application will ensure that no new building lots are being created as a result of this surplus dwelling severance. And it should be noted as well that agricultural uses are continued to be permitted on the remaining 136 hectares that are being rezoned to the A-9. So the planning analysis, as outlined in the staff report, does confirm that the appropriate measures have been taken to ensure that the rezoning and related severance is consistent with provincial policy and conforms to the County of Brant official plan. I'll note that none of the agencies and departments circulated raised any comments or concerns. I also received no concerns from any members of the public. So with that being said, it is my professional opinion that the request is appropriate and represents good planning, and therefore I recommend that the zoning bylaw amendment application, said BA 3621 DN, be approved.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Are there any questions from the committee for the planner? Okay, don't see any hands up, so I will ask if the agent or the applicant are here this evening to speak to this.
Hi, my name's Kate Wills from MHBC. Can you hear me?
I can hear you well, Kate. Thank you.
Hi. I'm here representing the applicant, Mr. Chris Martin. We previously processed an application for consent to sever off the surplus dwelling unit, similar to the application earlier this evening. We're simply asking for a restriction on future residential uses on the subject property. It's just to fulfill one of the conditions of the committee of adjustment approval. It has to be fulfilled within a year's time. I'm here to answer any questions and just to state that we support staff's recommendation. Thank you, Dan, for your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant's agent at this time? Okay, I don't see any hands up, so I'm going to turn to our clerk because I'd like to open this part of the meeting up to the public. And Alicia, do we have anybody from the public here this evening to speak to this application?
At this time, Mr. Chairman, we do not.
Okay, I will ask a second time if there's anyone from the public that wishes to speak to this application. And I'll ask a third time if there's anyone from the public that wishes to speak to this application. Seeing and hearing none, I will close this part of the meeting off to the public. I'll bring it back to the committee and I'll ask for a mover to get this recommendation on the floor. Moved by Mayor Bailey, second by Councillor Wheat. Is there any comments, questions, or discussions? Okay, seeing none, we'll call the vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? Okay, seeing none. Kate, are you still with us?
I'm here, yes.
Oh, there you are. So as I've pointed out already a couple times this evening, this decision will go to our council meeting November 23rd for final approval. And it looks like you got a much easier ride than your colleague did tonight. So, but thank you for coming up.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a great evening.
Bye-bye. Okay, so that completes all the applications for public hearings this evening. Under consent items, there were none that I seen. There was no staff reports, no communications or other business. At least I didn't see any. And nobody had their hand up, but I'll ask one more time. Does anyone have any other business? Okay, seeing none. I guess the next meeting will be December 7th. And on that note, I will call this meeting adjourned and bid everybody good night.
Good night, all.
Good night. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Totally.